objective is, today we'll measure lengths of several objects using inches and centimeters.
Now it's your turn to repeat the objective back to me. Ready? Let's go. Today we'll measure lengths of several objects using inches and centimeters. Sounds great. Now let's go over our important vocabulary for today's lesson. Our first word is inch. Everybody say inch. Nice job. And remember, inch can be abbreviated or shortened to two letters. Who remembers, what can inch be abbreviated to? Did you say IN period? If you did, you're totally right. Remember that inch can be shortened to IN period, and an abbreviation is just a faster, more efficient way of writing a word that's kind of long. Except inch isn't really that long, but when we're talking about measurement, sometimes we just want to write the measurement really quickly, and so using the abbreviation is super helpful. And an inch is about the length of the tip of your thumb to your first knuckle. Now your first knuckle, remember, is where your thumb bends. So just at that first line, that's where your knuckle is. And we measure inches using a ruler. Now our second vocabulary word today is centimeter. Everybody say centimeter. Nice job. And remember, centimeter can also be abbreviated. Do you remember what centimeter can be abbreviated to? CM period. You've got it. You're experts at this measuring stuff. Now, a centimeter is about the width of your pinky finger. So not the length this time, not from top to bottom, but from side to side. So for your pinky finger, we're talking about from this side to this side. That's about a centimeter. Now, we also use a ruler to measure in centimeters. And we have one new vocabulary word today, and that word is rounding. Can everybody say rounding? Nice job. And rounding just means choosing the nearest whole unit. So remember, we've talked about whole units or whole numbers this year, and we've also talked about fractions. So those two words go together. A whole unit are numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, 100, 150, 500. And fractions are just parts of whole numbers. So numbers like 1/4, 1/2, 3/4. When we round, we want to round to the nearest whole unit, so the nearest whole number. Now today you only have two easy steps to follow. Step 1 is to measure the object in inches or centimeters, and your math book is going to let you know which unit you should use today. Then step 2 says record your measurement. And next up, I'm going to model a couple of problems before you get started with your independent practice pages.
The directions at the top of the page say, measure to the nearest whole centimeter or inch. Number 1 says, measure the pencils using centimeters. And then there are two bullet statements. The first bullet statement says, emphasize that the end of the pencil should line up with the 0 on the ruler. I'll explain this very important measuring rule in just a moment. The second bullet says, record each measurement. So after each object, there is a line. That line is where you are supposed to write your measurement plus the unit that you're measuring with. So I'm going to model how to measure these two pencils. I take my ruler and I line up my ruler with the object. Now, before I move forward, I want to pause and just make sure that I am actually using the correct unit of measurement. Remember, they told me to measure using centimeters. Up here, you can see that there's a little label. It says mm and cm. Remember that cm is the abbreviation for centimeters. So I know that I'm using the right unit. On the other side, if I flip my ruler over, you can see a label that actually says inch. All right? So I make sure that I am using centimeters. Before I ever measure anything, I always want to make sure that I am on the correct side. Now I take my ruler And you can see on my ruler that there's this big gap of empty space. So normally on a ruler, we would want to line up the object with the very edge of the ruler. But since mine has this big empty gap, I'm actually going to slide it over until it lines up with this first line, which is my 0 marker. So I line up the tip of the pencil with that 0 marking on my ruler, and then I don't want to cover up my object because then I won't be able to see it. Actually, I could see it because my ruler is see-through, but you might not be able to using the ruler you have at home. And then all I do is I look at the end of the object and I see where it lands on the ruler. It lands right on the number 7, so that means that this first pencil is actually 7 centimeters long. So remember, cm is the abbreviation for centimeters, and then I need that period as well. I can't just write the number, because if I only write the measurement, then if I were to give this to, say, Chloe, she might say 7 inches, 7 centimeters, 7 feet. What do you mean, Miss Garcia? So I have to tell her which unit I am using. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the bottom pencil. I line up the tip of the pencil with that first marking, which is my 0 mark, and then I just look at the end of the object and it lines up with the number 12. So I know that this second pencil is 12 centimeters long. So 12 cm period. Number 2 says, measure the paintbrushes using inches. And then underneath that specific question, it also has the same 2 bullets from the first question. They say, emphasize that the end of the paintbrush should line up with the 0 on the ruler. So I'll model that for you again in just a moment. The second bullet says, record each measurement. So find those lines. That's exactly where you're going to write in your measurements, all right? So I take my ruler, and I always want to check to make sure that I'm using the right unit. Remember, this side is centimeters, and I know because even if the label's not there, my lines, my tick marks, are a lot closer together. They're much smaller than the other side. So I need to flip it over because this time I'm measuring in inches, and there's my label there. Now, I would also know, even if I didn't have that label, because inches are much bigger than centimeters, okay? So I take my ruler, and I'm going to line it up, not with the edge of my ruler, but I'm going to line it up with that first line so that I don't have all of that empty blank space. And then I just see where the paintbrush lands, and whoa, doesn't land exactly on 4. So I'm going to round up to the number 4. The end of the paintbrush is closer to the number 4 than it is to the number 3. It's more than halfway past 3. So I know that because this line in the middle of 3 and 4 is the halfway mark. That's where the fraction 1/2 would be. This would be 3 1/2. If it is the object past that halfway mark, then you go with the bigger number. If the object lands somewhere before the halfway mark, you round down to this nearest or the nearest smaller whole unit, which would in this case be 3. So I'm going to go with 4 inches. So 4 IN period. Now I'm going to measure this bigger paintbrush just like I did for the first one. So I line up that paintbrush with that first 0 mark. I see where the end lines up. It isn't at 5, but it's not quite at 6, but it is past this halfway mark. And remember, if it goes past the halfway point, then I round up to the next biggest number. If it's before this halfway point, then I round down to the nearest smaller number. So since it is half past that halfway point, I'm going to round up to 6 inches. When we round, it's important to know that our measurements are not exact. This paintbrush is about 4 inches. It's not exactly 4 inches because remember, we had to round up to 4. This paintbrush is not exactly 6 inches either. We had to round up to 6 inches. It's about 6 inches.
Now it's time for you to get started with your independent practice pages. So remember, for today's lesson, you are going to need a ruler, so make sure that you have one either printed off from our website, or if you have one around the house, then just use that one, okay? Now, for today's lesson, you're going to head to Google Classroom, and as usual, you have 2 options. Option 1 is to print off the work pages and to do them by hand. Then you head over to Seesaw and you post a video presentation for Final Check for Understanding. Or you can choose option 2, which is to complete the editable Seesaw templates. Then you also do a student presentation on Seesaw for your Final Check for Understanding. Good luck! Can't wait to see how your first day of actually doing some measurements go. Bye!